Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. The Afghan government and the Taliban have agreed to accelerate peace talks at a Moscow meeting that followed a conference there on the peace process. Addressing a press conference, a Taliban spokesman confirmed the development but criticized a joint statement issued after the Moscow talks. He said the Taliban would not allow anyone to impose a system contrary to Islamic values. At the same time, they warned the U.S. against defying a May 1st deadline for the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Pakistan has called for an immediate and transparent international probe into the extrajudicial killings of Kashmiris. The Foreign Office says the world must urge India to stop the egregious human rights violations in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry noted that occupying forces have killed 4 more civilians in the last week. Speaking at the weekly press briefing, he said Indian troops have killed 14 Kashmiris in 2021 so far. Israeli troops have shot dead a Palestinian during clashes near the occupied West Bank. He, along with hundreds of Palestinians, were demonstrating in a weekly protest against Israeli settlements. In Myanmar, security forces have shot dead 9 protesters in the towns of Ong Ban and Loika. Witnesses and local media say police used tear gas to disperse demonstrators and later opened fire. Protesters have also gathered in Yangon and Mandalay, as well as several other cities. More than 220 people have been killed in the military crackdown since the February 1st coup. Malaysia has ordered its diplomats in North Korea to leave the country within 48 hours. This comes after North Korea severed diplomatic ties with Malaysia following its decision to extradite a North Korean criminal suspect to the U.S. Several EU states have resumed their rollout of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine after Europe's medicines regulator concluded it was safe and effective. Here in Pakistan, the virus has claimed 40 lives and infected nearly 3,500 people overnight. The nationwide death toll has crossed 13,700. Globally, there are 2.6 million fatalities and more than 121 million cases so far. And in cricket, Afghanistan beat Zimbabwe in the second T20 International in Abu Dhabi to win the 3-match series with a game to spare. Zimbabwe were bowled out for 148 while chasing a target of 194 runs. Mohammad Nabi was declared player of the match for his all-round performance. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The Afghan government and the Taliban have agreed to accelerate peace talks at a Moscow meeting that followed a conference there on the peace process. Addressing a press conference, a Taliban spokesman confirmed the development but criticized a joint statement issued after the Moscow talks. He said the Taliban would not allow anyone to impose a system contrary to Islamic values. At the same time, they warned the U.S. of reaction if it defies a May 1st deadline for the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, but did not specify what would be their reaction. The warning comes days after the U.S. president said it's tough to meet the deadline as his administration reviews the last year's deal struck to end the decades of war. As part of the deal, intra-Afghan negotiations are currently stalled in Qatar. while violence continues to rage in the war-torn country. Pakistan says the onus lies on India to create an enabling environment for dialogue between the two countries. In a statement, the foreign minister urged New Delhi to find a peaceful solution to the Kashmir dispute. Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan will not shy away from dialogue if India reviews its policy on issues. He reiterated Prime Minister Imran Khan's call to take 2 steps towards peace if India takes 1. The foreign minister also lauded the reinforcement of ceasefire agreement between both the countries. In Myanmar, security forces have shot dead 9 protesters in the central town of Ong Ban. Witnesses and local media say police used tear gas to disperse the demonstrators and later opened fire. Protesters have also gathered in Yangon and Mandalay, as well as several other cities. The media reported that authorities have arrested 2 more journalists, including a BBC reporter. Meanwhile, Indonesian President Joko Widodo has called for a high-level ASEAN meeting on the Myanmar crisis. During a virtual address, he urged to restore democracy and halt violence in the country. More than 220 people have been killed in the military crackdown since the February 1st coup. Malaysia has ordered its diplomats in North Korea to leave the country within 48 hours. This comes after Pyongyang cut diplomatic ties with Malaysia following its decision to extradite a North Korean criminal suspect to the U.S. In a statement, Malaysia's foreign ministry said that the government was compelled to close its embassy in Pyongyang. It also denounced the move by North Korea to sever ties, describing it as unfriendly and unconstructive. But North Korea's foreign ministry said Malaysia committed a hostile act in subservience to the U.S. pressure. Ties between the two countries have been virtually frozen since the slaying of half-brother of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un in Malaysia. Saudi Arabia says multiple drones launched from Yemen have targeted an oil facility in Riyadh, igniting a fire at the installation. According to the Energy Ministry, the attack caused no damage and did not affect oil supplies. Yemen's Houthi rebels earlier said they launched 6 drones at a facility belonging to Saudi Aramco. Reacting, the kingdom said the attack targeted the security and the stability of the world's energy supplies. In recent weeks, the Houthis have stepped up attacks into Saudi Arabia amid renewed diplomatic efforts to end the war. Saudi Arabia has condemned the continued Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. UN envoy Abdul Aziz Al-Wasil said Riyadh continues to support the Palestinian cause at all political and economic levels. Al-Wasil said Saudi Arabia adheres to the Arab Peace Initiative proposed by Riyadh and adopted by Arab countries in 2002. He said the initiative affirms the right of Palestinians to obtain an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. He also expressed support for the return of refugees and Israel's withdrawal from the occupied Golan Heights. Israeli forces have shot and killed a Palestinian in an anti-settlement rally in the West Bank. The Palestinian Health Ministry said that Israeli forces opened fire towards the participants of a rally that called for defending Palestinian land. Authorities added that an injured man was brought to a hospital and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Beitzjan has become a scene for weekly protests against the Israeli authorities' move to construct new colonial settlements. In Alaska, China and the U.S. have traded bombs at the first high-level talks since President Joe Biden took office. The Foreign Affairs Chief of China's Communist Party, Zhang Yeji, told Washington to stop pushing its version of democracy on the world. He lashed out at the U.S. hypocrisy for criticizing Beijing on human rights. Yang said U.S. relies on its military and financial hegemony to maintain its long-armed jurisdiction against some countries. While U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the Biden administration is united with its allies in pushing back against China. He accused Beijing of increasing authoritarianism and assertiveness at home and abroad. The secretary said Beijing is threatening the rule-based order that maintains global stability. The Turkish president says Joe Biden's recent remarks about Russia's Vladimir Putin are unfitting of a U.S. president. Talking to the media, Recep Tayyip Erdogan described them as inappropriate and unacceptable. Erdogan added that Putin has done what is necessary by giving a very clever and elegant response. This comes as Biden called Putin a killer during an interview earlier this week, prompting diplomatic ties to sink to a new low. Putin later retaliated, saying he who said it did it. Ties between Ankara and Washington have been strained over a host of issues, including its acquisition of Russian S-400 systems. Many EU states are to restart their rollout of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine after Europe's medicines regulator concluded it was safe and effective. But a previously healthy Swedish woman has died just a week after being inoculated. Globally, there are 2.6 million fatalities and more than 121 million cases so far. More in this report.
Vaccine skepticism continues to confuse laypersons and makes the fight against the virus more difficult. The Caribbean nation, Cuba, has approved a second homegrown COVID-19 vaccine for the late-phase trials. Meanwhile, the U.S. has announced plans to send 4 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine to Mexico and Canada in loan deals. This comes as President Joe Biden announced that the U.S. is about to hit his administration's target of 100 million vaccine administrations.
Tomorrow, we will hit 100 million doses our administration has administered. But I've always said, that's just the floor. We will not stop until we beat this pandemic. Next week, I will announce our next goal to put shots in arms.
In Europe, amid the AstraZeneca vaccine controversy, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark have decided to continue a pause on the Oxford drug. The EU has threatened to tighten vaccine exports as rifts over the scarcity of the shots deepened and the bloc struggled to obtain more deliveries. Britain's vaccine supply setback took a new turn after it emerged that India delayed sending 5 million doses to the country. Meanwhile, France has imposed a month-long lockdown on Paris after a faltering vaccine rollout and spread of highly contagious variants.
Facing an acceleration of the virus and the pressure that's increasing on our hospital systems, we owe it to ourselves. The time has come to implement more demanding measures in most critical situations. In these of Paris and northern France regions, new massive measures to restrain the epidemic will be in place for 4 weeks.
With nearly 40,000 new cases, India's daily infections have spiked to the highest level in more than 3 months.
Pakistan has registered another 40 deaths from COVID-19 overnight. The health ministry says this has pushed the toll to 13,757. The ministry says nearly 3,500 people tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. Pakistan's caseload has crossed 619,000, of which more than 578,000 people have recovered. The ministry said the number of active cases has crossed 27,000. The ministry said over 2,600 coronavirus patients have been admitted to hospitals across the country. More than 2,000 are in critical condition. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Pakistan and Iraq have agreed to enhance their military engagements. On his official visit to Iraq, Pakistan's Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee met with defense authorities. Pakistan's state media says General Nadeem Raza held talks with Iraqi Defense Minister Juma Inad Sadoun Khatab al-Jiburi. He discussed matters of mutual interest with Iraqi Chief of Staff General Abdul Amir al-Rashid Yarallah al-Lami. The chairman also visited Defense University for Higher Military Studies, where he was presented the Guard of Honor. General Raza highlighted the positive role of Pakistan in countering violent extremism. He also shared the country's efforts for regional peace and stability, especially in Afghanistan. Sri Lanka and Bahrain have acknowledged Pakistan's positive role in regional peace and stability and pledged to bolster ties with Pakistan. The Pakistan's military's media wing said this after the Bahrain National Guard commander and the Sri Lankan army chief held separate meetings with General Kamajaved Bajwa in Rawalpindi. It said a regional security situation with particular reference to Afghanistan and matters of mutual interest were discussed in the two meetings. The Sri Lankan army chief also laid a wreath at the martyrs' monument upon his arrival at the general headquarters. Air Chief Marshal Zahir Ahmed Babar has assumed command of the Pakistan Air Force. He replaced Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Anwar Khan at the change of command ceremony at Air Headquarters in Islamabad. While addressing the ceremony, the outgoing Air Chief said PAF fulfilled the nation's expectations during Operation Swift Retort. He added that he is proud of leaving the Air Force at the highest level of operational preparedness. He said he is confident that his successor would lead PAF to new heights of excellence. Air Chief Marshal Baba was commissioned in the GDB branch in April 1986. He has served at the key operational and administrative positions, including the Deputy Chief of Air Staff. The Royal Saudi Land Forces have started a joint military exercise with the U.S. in the northwest Saudi Arabia. Saudi Foreign Ministry said the Falcon Clause 3 drill aimed to strengthen military relations and unify military concepts. The military said the exercise will raise the level of readiness and the ability of Saudi forces to work with allies. It added the drill will also prepare the forces against any external threats. The latest Saudi-US military collaboration follows the two-week Falcon Clause 2 exercise. This comes at a time of heightened regional tensions as Yemen's Houthi rebels step up their attacks on the kingdom. Russia says it will react if Bosnia takes steps towards joining NATO. The Russian embassy in Bosnia said Moscow will perceive this move as an act of hostility. The embassy said the purpose of NATO is to fight against Russia. It added that joining NATO will force Sarajevo to take a side in the military-political confrontation. Bosnia and Serbia are the only two Western Balkan countries that remain outside of NATO. Bosnia has long proclaimed integration with NATO and the European Union as strategic goals. But the Bosnian Serbs, who currently chair the country's tripartite presidency, want the country to remain neutral. In Mexico's central Mexico state, 13 law enforcement personnel have been killed in a gun attack on a convoy by suspected gang members. Security Minister for the State of Mexico, Rodrigo Martinez, says victims include 8 police officers and 5 prosecution investigators. Martinez said the convoy was attacked in broad daylight in the municipality of Coatepec Arenas as it patrolled the area. He said the attack is an affront to the Mexican state and vowed to respond with all force and support of the law. The killing of the 13 officers in the country's single biggest slaying of law enforcement personnel since October 2019. Lebanon's Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah says he will support a new cabinet if it is announced on Monday. This comes after the Prime Minister designate said he will meet with President on Monday. In a televised address, Nasrallah voiced support for a mix of technocrats and politicians in the new cabinet. He said the country will face problems if the new cabinet seeks to implement the reforms required by IMF. But PM-designate Asad Hariri said any new government can only end Lebanon's economic woes by re-engaging with the IMF. Meanwhile, most of the businesses have gone on strike in the country as public anger mounts over the political deadlock. Tanzania's Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan has sworn in as the president, becoming the first female head of East African state. Samia Hassan took the oath at the State House in the country's commercial capital, Dar es Salaam, following the death of President John Magufuli. In her first address as the president, Hassan called for unity and said the country needs to bury its differences. Hassan is also the country's first president born in Zanzibar, the archipelago that forms part of the Union of the Republic of Tanzania. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, nearly 200 people have been killed and 40,000 displaced since January following a surge of attacks in the northeast. The United Nations Refugee Agency has reported an alarming increase in attacks by the notorious Allied Democratic Forces. It said the militia has raided 25 villages, burnt dozens of houses and kidnapped over 70 people in less than 3 months. The ADF has the reputation of being the bloodiest of the 122 militias that plague the eastern DRC. According to a monitor, the group has killed more than 1,200 civilians in the Beni area alone since 2017. The massacres have become more frequent since an army offensive in 2019, forcing the ADF to break up into smaller units. In Australia, mice have been swarming the western New South Wales country town of Gilgandra for several weeks. Locals say this is the worst mice plague in decades. Eyewitnesses' video shows thousands of rodents swarming around a local farm. Farming communities have been hit the hardest by the uptick in mice. Local media says supermarkets are storing food in sealed containers and 3 patients at the hospital were bitten. Intensive abating programs are being tried with little signs of reducing, keeping the vermin numbers down. So locals are hoping for heavy rain to drown the mice in their burrows. China's Chang'e 5 lunar probe has successfully entered the halo orbit around the Sun-Earth Lagrangian point 1. Beijing Aerospace Control Center said the orbiter is in normal working condition. Control Center's chief said a team will carry out tests of the orbiter to provide support for the follow-up space exploration missions. It said the orbiter is now 936,700 kilometers away from Earth. Chang'e 5 has become China's first spacecraft in the halo orbit. It will remain in the orbit with a cycle of about 6 months. NASA has completed a test of engines on a Boeing-built rocket for Artemis missions that could take humans back to the moon. NASA conducted the test to simulate a launch by firing the engines while being anchored to a tower at its space center in Mississippi. The Space Launch System rocket is now expected to go to Florida for integration with the Lockheed Martin's Orient spacecraft. The hot fire is the final test of the Green Run series to ensure the core stage of the rocket is ready to launch Artemis missions to the moon. Artemis 1 is scheduled to orbit the moon with an uncrewed spacecraft in November. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. A 69-year-old Indonesian man has dedicated his life to the preservation of nature. His efforts have resulted in the miraculous transformation of barren land into lush green hills. More in this report.
This old man is a role model for the youth of the present world, which is on the verge of devastation amid environmental degradation. Sadiman, a 69-year-old Indonesian, has worked hard for 24 years to turn barren hills green. Moreover, he has also created water resources in a drought-prone mountainous area.
I want to increase water resources. And secondly, people need clean air. Humans need clean air as the forest is the Earth's lungs. Thirdly, it can help to prevent natural disasters because banyan trees have very long roots.
Sadiman, who was once considered crazy by his fellow villagers, is now affectionately known as Mbappe Sadiman or Grandpa Sadiman. Due to his efforts, residents of several nearby villages can access clean water.
I hope there will be other Mbah Sadimans in the future who care about the environment. Although he is poor, he volunteers and receives no support from anyone. He doesn't ask anything from the local central government. He will only ask for help when he needs to. If not, he wouldn't. He is honest and fighting alone, even which means he has to sell goats to buy seeds. He truly is a warrior.
Sadiman has planted at least 11,000 banyan and ficus trees in an area of over 250 hectares.
Alongside other benefits, the long and wide roots of these trees are also helpful in retaining groundwater and preventing land erosion.
Britain's late Princess Diana's handwritten and typed letters have gone up for sale at an auction house in Cornwall, England. Her 40 letters between 1990 and 1997 to her friend Roger Bramble make up part of the 36 lots on sale. What in this report?
Many people have impacted the world, but the legacy left by Princess Diana Spencer is unmatchable. It is no wonder why even 23 years after her demise, she continues to be remembered fondly. David Lay Auctions say they have received interest in her letters from around the world, including the United States and India.
I think it meant a lot to her to stay in touch with people she really cared about. And she opened up to Roger about Lucia Fleischer de Lima, for example, who was a woman who was close to her mother's age. And I think Diana liked maternal figures, really, people she could seek guidance from and counsel. I think the letter showed that just her friends were a small number of friends were absolutely key to, probably to her sanity, actually.
The auction house's research manager says the individual lots could fetch a total of around $42,000. Mimi Connell-Lay said reading the letters had made her change her previously indifferent opinion of Diana.
I get a sense of a real continuity. You know, she stayed a warm, loyal, affectionate person no matter what else was going on. And obviously we know that that period was a period of enormous turmoil in her life. She separated from Charles, they got divorced, all sorts of things happened during that time. And yet her relationship with Roger, who they were written to, obviously was a constant.
Proceeds from the sale will go to organizations with which the Princess and Bramble had a particular affinity. This includes the English National Ballet and the Young Musicians Symphony Orchestra.
Now the business updates. The U.S. stocks have tumbled after the Federal Reserve declined to extend a rule that allows banks to relax capital levels. The central bank's decision has hit the financial stocks hard, dropping the shares of J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo and Goldman Sachs. The indices of S&P 500 and DJI also traded lower, while Nasdaq Composite gained ground. Meanwhile, oil prices edged lower as a new wave of COVID-19 infections across Europe spurred fresh lockdowns. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.